Mid-Murray Council would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the land, the Ngadjuri, Naywong, Mangaraku, Ngarkat, Ngarrindjeri and Paramount peoples of the Mid-Murray lands and waters. It is upon their ancestral lands and waters that the Mid-Murray Council meets and operates, and Council pays respect to elders past and present and their spiritual beliefs that are of continuing importance to those First Nations peoples of today. Council further acknowledges the contributions and important role that First Nations peoples continue to play within the community, and we extend that respect to any peoples in attendance here today. And attendance, we have Dave, Councillor Davis, Ben on Zoom, Kitty, Neville, Mandy, myself, Mel and Gary here. Confirmation of minutes. So there's a motion there that the minutes of the Strategic Growth and Economic Activation Committee meeting held on the 30th of October 2024 be taken as read and confirmed. We have a mover for that. Kitty and Councillor Davis is seconding that.
Okay.
Do we have any discussion on that? Any changes needed? If not, we'll put that motion up. All those in favour? And against? Hang on, I'll do that again. All those in favour?
Sorry.
And against? That is carried. Declaration of interest. We'll just go around the room and then online. Any declaration of interest? No.
Nothing from me.
No. Hello, Matt. How are you going? We're just doing the declaration of interest now. Does anyone have a conflict or anything they need to report? No. Okay. Deputations are nil. So we'll go to item 7.1, committee work plan 24 to 27. The recommendation is that the report be received. We have a mover for that. Councillor Toczyk-McPeak and a seconder, Neville. Discussion. Anyone wish to talk or ask questions, or do you want to say something? Gary's going to tell us something.
Well, after the good news yesterday, some of this may allow us to do some of the work program too, and I'll look back at what the scope of the project is. So yeah, I think that is something that we can factor in potentially. But also with council having recently adopted the community development strategy, one of the things that we put in there was about the open space strategy as a sort of part of the work plan. So again, I think as we now sort of ramp up now looking at our resourcing within the community services team, there might be an opportunity to do some of that in-house, depending on the skill levels that we get within the candidates that we're interviewing next week for one of the roles. And looking at skill sets within the candidates, we might be able to do some of that in-house.
What are the roles for what?
Community development officer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we are advertised a role for the Christmas New Year period, so we'll be next week for a strategic community development role. And part of that position function will be to sort of just planning and research. So we can do some preliminary work hopefully in the space.
Excellent.
On the open space in the public.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
Exciting. So next time we see this work plan, it will have some changes.
Yes, hopefully so.
Right.
Just in terms of the River Murray International Dark Sky, we have a meeting next week with the State Planning Commission. So we're advocating for them to hopefully initiate the code amendment, or let's get some level of support around that. So we'll see what next week brings.
Yeah.
So any other questions anyone has any?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions online? No.
So with the code amendment, are we supporting a general code amendment for other councils as well?
So that's the conversation we want to have with the Commission as to how broad they want to take it. I think there are statewide opportunities as well as Mid-Murray specific requirements. So I think in terms of how a code amendment could be structured, there will be a statewide component and it's more specific for Mid-Murray.
Any questions? If not, we'll put that motion up. All those in favour? And against, that is carried. 7.2, Mid-Murray Growth Management and Housing Strategy Early Engagement Summary Report. The recommendation is that the report be received. We have a mover. Neville just put up his hand. Have we got a seconder for that?
Yes.
Councillor Tottenham, Pete, thank you. Gary, do you want to talk on this?
Just to reiterate that this is only just the summary report that the consultants have put together following the engagement last year. I think in terms of the response rate to the engagement, 75 survey responses is pretty reasonable. Obviously, we'd always like more. The 35 participants at 3 workshops, again, I think is a reasonable attendance. It's unfortunate we did have no one attend this one reached, other than Kitty in terms of, but Kitty also came to Manham.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think we got some good information that the consultants have summarised and have got now the information there to start preparing the strategy. And yeah, the little workshop that we're going to do at the end of the meeting is to hopefully help support some of that thinking for the strategy.
Does anyone have any questions?
I wouldn't mind making a comment.
Yeah, sure, Matt.
I appreciate the response rate might be, I don't really know what consultations in the area have turned up previously, but my general reading of it is the response rate is extremely, it doesn't tell us very much, and it's very squeaky wheel, and honestly, I think we just need to put our thinking caps on and not pay terribly much attention to it, because I don't think it tells us very much in terms of strategic choices around the growth strategy myself. Yeah, I make one exception. There was a very lengthy submission written by some fellow, which I really enjoyed reading towards the end. I can't remember who it was. But I didn't, like, for example, all the commentary around Morgan, none of that added anything to my perspective, really. It just struck me as people from Morgan rightly saying, we want something in area, but that doesn't mean that that's the best choice.
Yes.
And
largely I felt what feedback was in there was that type of feedback.
Yeah, I noticed that most of the feedback were in the places that we were holding consultation.
That's right.
That's always the difficulty, because people's focus is very much local and not necessarily seeing how they sit within a regional context.
Yeah.
And that's always hard. And so, yes, Matt, I think you're right in that context. And I think, you could sort of say that, the question about which towns, was asked at each of the workshops and during the survey. Again, it's very parochial. It should be our town first, and maybe another town. So, again, the towns that came out, strongly were clearly Manham, Morgan, Swan Reach, Truro, as probably areas for focus. And I think, yes, Matt, you're right in that in the exercise that we're going to do at the end of this meeting, will hopefully will bring out some of your thoughts around where some of that growth may be targeted.
Yeah.
Any further questions or comments?
No, I just think, if I may, that following on from what Matt said, I suppose, this approach is being taken across the country because it's the housing growth and development sort of concept. So I'm assuming that loads of other regions are doing the same strategy
Not
development.
necessarily, no.
No,
Because others have done growth strategies, yes. And the approach to each growth strategy may be slightly different.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. I suppose I just mean that, taking a look at a strategy like that in somewhere that like a city council is a whole different ballgame.
Yes.
Where there's commonality. I mean, part of the issue for us, Matt, always is the disparate and spread out nature of this region makes it very difficult to get a cohesive view.
Yeah, no, I completely accept. I'm not saying it was an exercise that shouldn't be done or
No,
anything of that nature. I'm just saying all I was saying is my reflection on it, looking at it, is it's largely turned out a bunch of parochial comments that tell us something, but don't tell us, but we should be cautious about
Yes.
having it steer everything, I guess.
Wait to
Yeah.
accordingly.
Yeah.
Correct. So it's not that it's a pointless exercise, far from it, of course not. And there are useful little snippets of insights and the like, clearly, when you read through the material. But a lot of it is the type of thing you kind of, I guess, you've got to take it with a grain of salt or at some level, or you've got to weight it, as you say, accordingly.
Again, I think that's what's important for this committee and obviously the consultants when they're developing the plan, that this flavours what might happen in terms of where we identify growth. It's not going to predetermine, you know, because there was, you know, X people said Morgan should have all the growth, doesn't mean that's where it should happen. So it's tailored by the evidence around statistics of DA approvals and infrastructure that's already in place. They're all the things that are going to determine ultimately where some of that growth is going to be.
And it does tell us that people are passionate about their towns.
Yes.
Correct.
So I think that's a positive,
Yeah.
and we shouldn't lose that at all.
Yeah.
For sure. Any further questions or comments in relation to item 7.2? If not, we'll put that motion up. All those in favour? Just can't see two on screen in favour or against. Yeah, and now against, that is carried. And we'll go to item 7.3, which is accommodation diversity code amendment draft submission. And the recommendation is that the report be received, that the committee recommends to council that the draft submission to the accommodation diversity code amendment be endorsed, and the committee recommends to council that the CEO be authorised to make minor amendments to the draft submission. We have a mover for that motion. Councillor Todgick-Peak and Councillor Davis is seconding that. Do you want to speak to that, Gary?
Yeah, look, this code amendment, again, it's a statewide code amendment. It's again trying to focus on the housing crisis, looking at, you know, a different housing choice, looking at probably doesn't have a great impact on Mid-Murray Council. So our comments, you know, are very sort of high level, you know, sort of response rather than specifically to Mid-Murray. So yeah, it's generally very supportive of the code amendment from a state perspective.
Can I just ask a question about, you know, we obviously have housing issues here, and does the concept of further subdivision come under this section?
It mainly was focusing on housing choice density. So the land division is there from that perspective. But it was very much also about sort of type. So what choices people have for housing style, as much as it is for land division.
I've got a question sort of bit about that. With land divisions and subdivisions that have already happened, with previous information of previous councils, that may not be appropriate anymore, they still stand?
They do,
No
yes.
matter-
Yep. Yeah, as policy changes, it's not retrospective.
Yeah.
So decisions made under old policy stand.
Or-
Yeah, it's only new applications for new development where the new policy, once it's adopted,
Mhm.
would apply.
Okay, and another question about, we talk about co-housing, co-living land use. Residential accommodation that does not contain a full kitchen, is that like cooperative living? What is co-living?
It's a new term trying to capture, to a certain extent, almost multi-generational living.
Okay,
As much as you know, any other sort of co-living arrangements. So yeah, as a new term, it is quite challenging, I think, in terms of looking at how people live.
Mhm.
And so this code amendment is trying to sort of capture as much as that as possible. So if we jump to the actual code for a minute.
I found the terminology a bit
Yeah.
unfamiliar.
Yeah, so because now the way the code is structured, it can introduce new definitions. And so then it gives a bit more clarity around the intent of policy.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying to.
So housing co-ops are a separate thing altogether.
Well, housing co-ops can already be applied
Yeah.
for under the system.
That's not what this is a new I don't understand how this differs from some of the existing provisions, Gary.
Yeah, look, it's
So
so
it's very
subtle.
similar to, like, you know, I mean, it's not rooming houses, but, you know, like it's very similar to a number of things like supported accommodation. There's a number of ones which are all very similar.
Where there's
Yeah.
joint
Yeah,
facilities.
like I said, they're really trying to give a bit more, you know, clarity definition around some of those intended uses where, you know, dwelling has a definition, you know, traditionally it has a very, you know, clear sort of set, whereas, you know, student accommodation, granny flat, ancillary accommodation, they're just trying to give it a little bit more clarity around some of the opportunities that the policy can provide.
Can I clarify, does this rationalize those under that umbrella of co-living, or is it just a new category in addition to those ones?
Well, I'll just try to find again, Matt. Because we've got, you know, sort of the sort of current policy of residential flat buildings, apartments, and build to rent, student accommodation, retirement facility, and supported accommodation. And so then they're sort of looking at the intended policy to refine what is meant by flat buildings and apartments in terms of that rent to build. Student accommodation to apply to student accommodation to consider any requirements necessary to ensure self-contained student accommodation is supported, whereas before it used to be associated with the dwelling. So you need to have common areas, and same with granny flats. We used to have common elements. Now they can be standalone. Yeah, that co-living one's just escaping me for the moment.
So, my observation on this, and I also have a question about the new overlay for the retirement villages, facilities, and supported accommodation, is these strike me as unduly complicating the code. Like, whenever they're looking at things like this, they should be looking at rationalizing and consolidating land use categories rather than introducing a new one to sit alongside the existing one, because then you just end up with a proliferation. Instead of having 5 categories of things which don't quite capture all the situations, you end up having 7 categories which don't quite capture all the situations. You end up coming in and amending it all again. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just seems to me that this is a missed opportunity to rationalize some of those things. And I would say that just in relation to the overlay, and I realize this doesn't particularly apply, I guess, in our council areas, but the general proposition here is about the efficiency of the zoning system, which this council has an interest in, like everyone else. I don't support bringing in a new overlay to deal with something which can be written just as a set of rules. It just seems to me to be unnecessary junk to just chuck in yet another layer of something in there just because if you're going to have large sites which are larger than a hectare being allowed to go up to 4 to 6 stories in a residential area, it just seems to me that should be allowed on a performance basis for certain things without needing to have another overlay. So I don't really support the idea of the overlay, and I think
I suppose, Matt, the reason for the overlay is that it's written once in one location.
Yeah.
That applies then to multiple zones, rather than having to write that policy into each separate zone.
No, you don't need to write it into each separate zone. That's what I'm saying. You just simply have it as a general rule that in the following zones. I just think this unduly complicates it.
I get your point.
This is not what overlays were meant to be used for, and we've already got far too many of them and far too many zones. So I just think this shouldn't be in an overlay. When they did this type of thing in the city rezoning, you might remember they had a thing called a catalyst site, which was basically saying it's a larger site in a higher density zone, then you might be able to do more with it. And what you didn't have to you didn't have to draw a line around it. You just said if it's larger than a certain size, then this is what happens. So, I mean, I realise this does ultimately, it's a bit, it doesn't really, it doesn't have very immediate applications in our council area. I can't see there suddenly being a bunch of 4 to 6 story retirement villages and supported accommodation sites suddenly blossoming like mushrooms across the towns. But it does just speak to, I just think they've got their head set wrong. They're complicating the code, whereas the code should be simplified. It's already too complicated and doesn't achieve all the objects that it's meant to. So, and that's,
Well,
yeah.
I think we'll take that on board, Matt, and review our submission just with a little bit of that land insight area.
Yeah.
We put it to council, and yeah, we'll see if we can refine it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Is
support,
everyone else happy with that?
support things like the review of definitions
Yeah.
that they're proposing, so
Mhm.
to eliminate that.
Streamlining of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any further feedback or questions? If not, we'll put that motion up. All those in favour? And against? That is carried. Just not got my vote from councillor Davis. In favour? Yeah. Okay, 8.1, the recommendation is that the report be received. On tourism, have we got a mover for that? Kitty, thank you. A seconder, Neville, thank you.
Oh, look, I'll just make one comment through Mayor Bailey. Andy's an apologies doing a first aid course. It's obviously just an information report. The Watercraft Asset Management Plan was endorsed by council at the committee meeting or the council meeting this week. So that's a significant step forward for tourism to make sure that we know. And you know, previously we've used educated assumptions on that, but now we've actually got a plan that prioritises and identifies the requirements for those boats moving forward. As it's pointed out in the report, a sustainability review of that area is underway, and a report will be provided to council in due course on that.
Thanks, Anne. Kitty, would you wish to speak on your motion?
I have just had a question. 3.3.1. Understanding the value of our tourism economy and council's return on investment.
What's the council's return on investment?
That's what we put in.
Yeah, I understand, but
Yeah.
in a dollar figure, is there,
Yeah, so-
can we see that?
We're doing some reviews on that.
Okay.
Dan, have you got any extra?
So I didn't understand the reference to a number.
Oh,
That's just in
Part of the
the,
strategic plan.
Strategic plan.
Oh, okay, so not in the agenda document.
no, just in our strategic plan reference.
Yeah, theme and prosperity, key activity, 3.3.1.
Yeah, could you, so what was that?
So Kitty's asking, how do we understand the value of our tourism economy and council's return to investment? Have we got some figures on that?
Yeah, so there's data provided by SATC on the number of tourists that come, how many bed states, and Dave, you want to provide some more technical tourism definitions than this. So yeah, it's understanding what the value of those tourists are bringing into the economy. And yeah, so that's what the SATC do.
I'm
and-
after the dollars.
So can
I
we
don't
take that
have
on, like
sorry.
next report, put some figures in if we've got that data?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
happy with that?
Thanks.
Perfect. Any further questions or feedback?
I think maybe if I could just say that the conversation yesterday was a good one about this, that we had to have. Obviously, asset management plans, they're crucial. We've been told we need them and we want them. And it's brilliant that we've got this one. But we're also really aware that there's going to be another huge conversation this year about the sustainability. Now, there isn't a lot more than we're spending now in the tourism dollars in the asset management plan. There's a little bit, but so it's not significantly different to what we've budgeted for. However, notwithstanding that, obviously, we still have a sustainability review in place and we have to consider the cost of this whole area along with everything else. And it will be, I'm sure, a detailed conversation later in the year.
That's the sustainability of the council.
Of the
Of the
tourism.
tourism sector,
Oh,
yeah.
because we're reviewing everything in the
Yeah.
sustainability with the sustainability.
We spend over $1 million on tourism, so we're reviewing each area.
Cool.
Yes.
Any further questions or comments? Super. If not, we'll put that motion up. All those in favour? And against? That is carried. Thank you. Questions without notice? Are there any questions without notice?
Yeah. Someone told me that a lady got hit by a boat at Madam the other day. Is there an update on that person's health?
Probably not to do with this meeting, but I can have a chat to that.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions without notice? Confidential report, Sarah Neal, next meeting to be held at Canberra at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, the 30th of April, 2025. I declare the meeting closed at 2:30, but stay on board. We're going to do a question and workshop.
That's right, just in a workshop.